actually, I had one in between as well that I did. So I did Here's What I Don't Get, and then I did a solo one called Hot Chaco, and then I did another one called Buck and Chaco.
How am I going to remember all this?
I don't know. You got a pen.
Okay. I do have a pen. I do have a pen. Hello, I am Allan Ruhl here from AllanRuhl.com. I have a very special guest with me today. He is a Catholic podcaster and a traditional Catholic. His name is Joel Chaco. He did the podcast Here's What I Don't Get and Buck and Chaco, where he he co-hosted with a Protestant. He was obviously the Catholic. And he has an incredible testimony. And yeah, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to first say thanks very much for having me on the show, and it's always good to chat with fellow Catholics as well fellow parishioners of the same church that I go to.
Yeah, we go to the same church.
That's right. Right. So, my story, I guess, of how I ended up at that church started with me falling away for about 20 years or more from the Catholic faith. Probably in my teens, I started to fall away shortly after my confirmation, and there was a lot of factors there. I take full responsibility for the fact that took place, but there was a long period of time where I fell away from the church. I think I formally fell away around 2002, around the time of when the scandals hit.
Oh, how could I forget?
Yeah, and it became a very difficult thing to defend. I wouldn't say that I was brought up with very strong apologetics. I used to get trounced all the time by Protestant peers in my school or atheists when I was in university.
Don't feel bad. I used to too. That used to be the case.
Yeah, a lot of us weren't really armed for battle, so to speak. But I did spend a lot of time away. I never called myself an atheist, but I definitely went down the road of agnosticism. Playing Mr. Humble and saying, "Well, how am I to know what God is, or who God is, or how He's represented, or what He means to my life? I'll just find out when I die." That's kind of the way that I lived my life for quite a long time. But it wasn't until it was about almost 2 years ago that I was definitely in a dark place. I'm a parent, I have 2 kids, and a lot of responsibilities as a parent. And my wife was off work, and I was the only one that was, the sole breadwinner in the household, and just trying to make ends meet and trying to keep my anger under control. And so at a certain point, there was a time where I was really questioning how I was as a father. And I even went to my dad about it and, trying to say, because I had an outburst one time after a Thanksgiving dinner at my son in front of everybody in the family. It's extremely embarrassing. And at a certain point, I started to think to myself, like, how much of am I a failure as a father? What am I doing wrong? And so we used to do this thing in our house where, to try to kind of keep our spirits up, we would collect dimes and put them into a dime jar and kind of count them up as wishes as time went on. And one day it was in particular a really rotten day for me. I was really down in the dumps. It was a weekend, and I went and I found a couple of these dimes and I put them into the dime jar, and the dime jar was empty. And And so I turned to my wife and I said, did you empty out the dime jar? Why would you empty out the dime jar? And she's like, I didn't touch the dime jar. It wasn't me. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw my son. He was just kind of slinking in the corner, kind of, don't look at me, kind of thing. He was trying to hide almost. And I turned to him and was, hey, little man, did you take the dimes out of the dime jar? And he was like, just burst out crying. I was saving up for a video game. And
wait, what video game was this?
I think it was something for his leap pad. I think he had this little leapfrog kind of a kid's kind of handheld kind of little device, and you could get little cartridges for it with education games. So I think he was saving up for one of those.
Huh, I have actually no idea what that is. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, so I didn't get mad at him. There was no point in getting mad at him because I suddenly had this kind of this epiphany, like, I don't think I've taught my son that what he did was stealing. And I don't think that I taught my son that stealing is wrong. And I started to kind of have this avalanche of thoughts of like, what have I taught my son in terms of what's right and what's wrong? And then I was like, why do I know what I do is right or wrong? Like, where do I get my moral code from? And all of a sudden I started realizing that, like, when we moved back to Calgary, I thought we would run into a bunch of my old classmates or my old friends from before. I mean, I literally lived about 5 minutes away from where I grew up. And so I thought, when we moved back in 2016, I thought, hey, we'll totally run into all these people and maybe we'll get to know the community better. Maybe I'll coach soccer and then I can, we can meet some of the other parents or something, because we had very little in terms of a social circle. And so while I'm thinking about this, I'm going, where my moral code, where did I get all this from? Like, what community was I a part of? And why did, all this stuff of like how I came to be, a quote unquote ethical person, or so I thought. I thought about my old church which I was growing up, where I went when I was growing up. And so I said to my wife, I'm like, maybe we need to look into a church. Like, maybe we need to kind of go that route. And so I went to go, and I was like, I grew up in St. Peter's, so I'm going to go and look up St. Peter's and see when the next Mass time is, or just see what's going on there. And so I go onto their website, I sit down with my laptop, and the very first, like, they had all the videos of the homilies, and the very first homily I saw was one called The Labor of Parenting. And I watched it, and it hit me. It hit me in this way where I was realizing all that I was missing in my life. And it was exactly what I needed to hear at that time, especially given the fact that I was doubting my everything. So I started looking at the other homes, and I got this home feeling that was coming over me. It was just like I could see the backdrop of the place, and I was like, I know that building, I know that lectern. And I didn't know that priest, and I hadn't been there forever, but I was like, and I just felt drawn back in. Like I used to listen to these homilies as a kid, but I didn't listen to them. I just kind of dozed off and looked around, and I never really fully listened to a homily before. So, backstory, I used to smoke pot every single day. Not during the day so much as at night. And so my habit would be put my kids to bed and make sure that the dishes were done. And then, some people have a glass of wine. I went into my shed and I would smoke pot to unwind, to let go, to fall away. And what was happening is that I used to listen to all these podcasts when I go out there. A lot of them were political podcasts, or conspiracy podcasts, or comedy podcasts. And what I found is that after I started catching these homilies, I felt myself wanting to listen to those more. I could see that the MP3s were there, so I would download those to my phone. And, for a little while I'd listen to them and I'd be like, stoned and listening to them and going, wow, this is deep and this is really hitting me. Then all of a sudden I kind of like, but I don't really want to do that anymore here. I don't want to. It just felt wrong to keep going out there and listening to the Word of God or while doing that. And so something that was a habit of mine where I did for every night for over a decade, slowly, easily, I just stopped doing. And I found myself listening more and more and more to these podcasts, but I still hadn't gone back to the church yet. I just didn't feel like worthy, if that makes any sense. It was like I needed to learn something. I felt like still on the outside, but I really desperately wanted to be back in. So, about a month went by almost, because it was in September that I kind of had this epiphany and was working towards it. And I finally hit kind of a rock bottom, and I go back to this Thanksgiving where I yelled at my son in front of my whole family, and I was so embarrassed. And I realized that I was slipping. I was extremely depressed, and I went to the doctor to this one morning to the day of the election here in Calgary. I went and I went to go and try to get a prescription for something, just something to make me not feel so bad.
Municipal election?
Yes, the municipal election.
Okay.
And I just everything. The hard part is that when you listen to political podcasts, you read the newspaper, you see all this bad news, all this stuff all the time. It just drags you down, and you get locked in it. It becomes all encompassing, and the world starts to get kind of gray and blah, and you don't see any hope. And I didn't know where to put hope. So here I was coming off of this awful dinner. Yeah, I was listening to some of these homilies, but I wasn't fully ready yet. I hadn't made the leap yet. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, not having it. He was, he was like, no, you're going to go to a counselor first before I'm not going to write you a prescription for something. And I went to go meet with my dad afterwards, and he was getting ready to go to go vote. And he was in the garage, and he was just swearing up a storm. He was really angry because he too was in the dark. He too was in a bad way, and he's because of his medical condition, he needs a wheelchair. And somebody had put his wheelchair away in the garage, and he wanted to go and vote. He was really angry because of this wheelchair being put away. So I went to go and meet with him, and just kind of go to talk about the night before and how embarrassed I was, and going to the doctor. And I'm seeing him in that space, and I'm thinking, okay, I should probably talk first. So I helped him down, and I cheered him up, and then all of a sudden I broke down. And I said, Dad, I feel like a complete failure. And I feel like a failure as a husband. I feel like a failure as a son, and I feel like a failure as a father. I'm letting everybody down. And at the time, I was doing so brutal, like work. We were barely making ends meet, and I was embarrassed. And I actually said to him, I said, Dad, if I wasn't married, if I didn't have these kids that need me, I think I'd probably exit. That's the word I used, exit. And, no parent wants to do that. And so he calmed me down in the moment. I broke down, and he said, you got to be calmer. When you get that time where you get really angry about something, you just got to fake it till you make it. You got to be calmer. And I said, Dad, I don't know how. I don't know where I'm going to get that from. And so it was that week that I smoked my last pot that night. My heart wasn't feeling so good. I was like getting real tense about it. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And I decided, I was like, okay, I need to go and talk to the man upstairs. And I gotta do something about this. I gotta clean up my act. I gotta figure this out. And so I realized I gotta go to confession first. So that weekend, I called my mom up, and because I thought when I was growing up all the time, she was the one that dragged us to go to church. My dad hardly ever went. He was raised Catholic, went to a Catholic school, but kind of like what we call a Catholic in name only. And he instead of going to mass with us, he would say, "Oh no, I'm good," and he'd stay home and watch football. So at this point, nobody in my family was going to church. Nobody was going to mass. But I just felt this draw to come back. And so I went, and it was October 21st, 2017. I waited my turn, I got in, and I took about 25 minutes to confess all the sins that I had built up for all this time being away. I started to do it, and I started to just absolutely, I couldn't get it out. I was choked up. It was so monumental, so big to just kind of unload all this stuff. And it's funny because the priest at the time, he was like, "Oh, don't worry about that. The church doesn't care about that anymore." And there were things that the church definitely still cares about. We'll always care about premarital sex, and
it's stuff that he doesn't care about.
Yeah. But as I was in the midst of it, I was just could barely get it out, and he was like, slow down. And then he just pointed at this painting that was kind of popped up on the ground of the parable of the prodigal son returning, and that's when it was just boom. Because then at that moment I realized I wasn't just talking to some priest. I was talking to our Lord. I was confessing straight up to Him, as I should be. But I hadn't been it forever. I hadn't been since I was a preteen, and maybe since my confirmation. I think that was like the last time I had ever gone. So, strangely enough, He absolved me, and my penance was 1 hour Father. 1 hour Father. And I remember looking at him going, "That's it? Okay." I just unloaded 20 years worth of, okay, all right. But I wasn't going to waste any time. I went out, I immediately dropped to my knees in the pew, and I did the Our Father. And I'll never forget that moment. Everything changed. It was like everything was going to be okay. And everything lifted off. All my insecurities and all my doubts about the world, I had hope again. And it just felt lighter. The world seemed brighter. The colors. I remember walking outside, and it was like that moment of like the Wizard of Oz, when she walks out and it goes from black and white to like Technicolor. It was like that. It was blazing color. And my mom, she went with me, but she didn't go in to confess. She was just accompanying me. And it was a Saturday, and they had the Saturday vigil mass that followed after that. And I wasn't sure if I was going to go or not, but when I got into the car, and it was still just, I was still blown away by how it all felt. Like I just redeemed. I just felt like everything was gonna make sense again. Like I completely lost all the fog. And so I came back in, and we decided we're gonna go back in for the mass, and I received communion for the very first time in a very, very long time. I did it in the hands because I was taught that you're not supposed to take it on the tongue if you're born after a certain. wrongly taught, but
Yeah, some nonsense. Yeah.
yeah, but that's how I was taught. And that was the only time I took it in the hands.
Is that the same priest who told you that the church doesn't care about those sins or whatever?
Nah, no, this was like a semi-retired priest who he's a good guy, he's a great homilist, but in terms of confessors, like you almost feel like you have to say like, Father, I think you should give me a little bit more. I think I deserve a little bit more.
One Our Father, yeah.
So I realized the value of confession. It's such a beautiful sacrament. And then to be able to have communion right afterwards, it's just like you just feel completely absorbed back in. Like it is. You're forgiven. You're absolved. And okay, onward. Let's get going on to the good stuff. Go forth and sin no more. And of course we all keep sinning, but you try. You get to know yourself better. So what was interesting is that everything changed from then on. We were married outside of the church. Had to get that fixed. We hadn't baptized our children. Got that fixed right away. What was really interesting was how the very next day I went to go to take my family out to the mountains, because normally I was used to working 7 days a week, and I decided to not do that anymore. I remember saying to my wife, I'm like, I think I'm going to be going to church from now on, and I don't think I'm ever going to work another Sunday in my life. And she was really happy to hear that. Because I'd already gone to Mass before, I said, let's make this
Wait. Was she happy that you were going to church or you weren't going to work Sunday?
A little bit of both, actually. I mean, it was a little bit of a change, because, I had just gone back that day and said how awesome it was. And I don't think she was ready to, see how I was actually... it wasn't long after that I started going to, daily Mass. And that was a little bit of a spin, because it was like, I get up in the morning, and then, looking at the kids, and it's like every day I'm going to go over to the Mass by myself, because, she wasn't Catholic. But what was interesting is that she was on board for all the sacraments. So she was on board for getting our marriage blessed. She was on board for getting our kids baptized. And when I went to go and look up my own baptismal information, I said I came back to the church and confessed on October 21st, 2017. Well, when I looked at my own baptismal certificate, I saw that October 21st is actually the day I was baptized. And so I thought that was really, that's kind of a really special. I guess there's no real coincidences when you have something like that. Like, what are the odds? Well, 1 in 265, but still. So I started going to Mass on a daily basis, and I really liked the confession. But I don't want to run too long on my testimony again. But what I want to say is that I started to confession more on the 5 first Saturdays. And they kept on canceling or moving or blocking the Saturday confession at St. Peter's. And in the meantime, I was, I'd gone back through all these homilies, and I got almost caught up for the last 2 years worth of homilies. And I started to reach out and look for more stuff. And I came across Sensus Fidelium, YouTube channel.
That's a great channel.
And through that, I was listening to Father Philip Wolf, and I was listening to Father Chad Ripperger and Father Isaac, and I was loving it. And I didn't even know that the traditional Latin Mass still existed. I was re-catechizing myself as I went, and I remember I was listening to him. He was talking about the Latin Mass, and I was like, oh, that sounds kind of novel and interesting. I might want to go and check it out someday. Well, they canceled another confession on a Saturday, the first Saturday, and so I decided that's what I'm going to go and check out The one church in Calgary that still does the Latin Mass in the diocese. And so I thought I'd go check it out and go and confess. And when I confessed there, it was incredible because the feedback I got was really helpful, and the penance I got was definitely reasonable, and just to the degree that we can be at. But I remember sitting through the Mass for the very first time and thinking, wow, this is such a radical difference from what I am used to. But I loved it, like, a lot. And in the meantime, all that period of time, I started doing the rosary every day, praying for my family to convert. My mom came back, my sister came back, her husband came back, my brother came back. His fiance, she converted. My wife converted. My dad started coming back. But before my wife converted, I wasn't sure if I could. Latin Mass became my Saturday secret. It was like I was like, okay, I'll go there every Saturday. So I kept going to these low masses, and that's all I knew. And but that first time, I remember sitting in that the low mass of the Latin Mass. The first time I went, and I thought, I am home. This is just, it feels incredibly right.
I had the same feeling back on the 5th of August, 2012.
Oh, really?
Yes, back in my hometown when I went to Latin Mass for the first time.
It's incredible.
And just the preaching was amazing. Like they quoted Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Pope Gregory the Great, Thomas Aquinas. I'm like, oh, I thought these are just footnotes in a textbook or something. But no, he's bringing them to life.
I love a good homily that incorporates the saint of the feast day. That was something that was always bugging me when I was going to the Novus Ordos. I'd look in the missal and be like, feast day of so-and-so, and I'd wait to hear something about that guy's life or that woman's life, and never hear anything about it. It was so rare, and yet whenever I go to the Latin Mass, if it's a proper feast day and they do a homily, I'm going to learn something. And I think the saints are, of course, they're the best examples you can possibly get.
Yeah.
In terms of role models and who to model yourself after, which is really interesting because when I was a kid growing up, you always think of the saints as oh, they're so perfect. Oh, they're so good. I'll never get to that point. I'll never, But then you hear all these great stories of them. And there's so many of them that did convert later on. You brought up Ignatius of Loyola. I always loved the story of Ignatius of Loyola. St. Augustine.
St. Francis of Assisi.
Yeah. Lots of these great saints that we can, be in communion with, and pray to. And
the thing that's so nice about saints is, that's our spiritual family. For example, this is to mainly all the Protestants out there, but I mean, if I were to ask you who your parents are, you know who your grandparents are. Do you know 5 or 6 generations back? No, you've got no idea. That's your biological family, but our spiritual family, we know who's been in our spiritual family the last 2,000 years. It doesn't matter how far they are back. And
and the wealth of knowledge they pass on.
Yeah,
they pass on so much knowledge that you can. It's such a deep dive. You can keep learning from the saints for the rest of your life and never hit the bottom.
Yeah, and they're I like the fact that we ask them to pray for us. They're our family. They're close to us. They don't. Yeah. You don't stop being a Christian when you go to heaven. You're still a Christian. You're still trying to help out the church militant on earth.
That's right.
So, I mean, so I really cherish the idea of spiritual family because, like I said, you go about 5, 6 generations, I don't know my family's names. And most people don't either, unless they're big into genealogy or anything. But we know who our spiritual family is.
And I think there's something to be said there, again, about even just the Latin Mass. When I go to the Latin Mass, I know my ancestors, when you say about, 5 generations back, well, I know the Catholic ones, they went to the same mass, so it feels like it's in my DNA,
Oh. See, that's
and
not my DNA. That's not my DNA. My dad's Protestant. My mom is Greek Catholic. So I got the Protestant.
okay, but to be fair, even if you go back on that Protestant line, you go past 1517 if you're going backwards,
Yeah,
and you're going to get
they're
back into
Lutheran,
it.
so they go all the way
Yeah.
back.
You go into the 1400s, where a lot of these great saints are, you're going to catch on a lot of that stuff as well.
That's true. Touche.
So the nice thing is like, I finally I had to wait a little while. Once my wife finally converted, and it was beautiful. It was so great. I was so happy that she's on board. That I finally got to go to a sung mass for the very first time. And the very first time I got to a sung mass, it was, how would you describe it? It was a glimpse of heaven on earth.
It is heaven on earth.
The incense smoke met with the light coming through the stained glass windows, and it was like colors were dancing, and the angels were singing,
and you could hear the Gregorian chants. And
yeah, it was. The first thing I thought was how beautiful it was, and the second thing I thought was, I feel cheated. Like, I just feel cheated. Like, this was stolen from me. And so, in my heart, I was like, I just want to be here. But I didn't want to, throw everything off because my wife had just converted.
Yeah.
And
by the way, we're cranking it up a notch.
Yeah, I'm going to throw you in the deep end. But what was really interesting is that the Lord works in His way, and a series of circumstances that just landed up that the sung mass was the only one we could go to this one weekend. We were close to it, so I said to my wife, I'm like, well, let's, because my parents were watching the kids, let's go to the sung mass together. And her feeling was the same. She was blown away, and we were both just like, okay, so how do we do this? Like, the kids, our kids are, they're not easy, and but how do we do this? And we still just kept going to the Nova Soto for a while until I finally made the decision after going and witnessing a confirmation sacrament, where these, one of the sponsors afterwards, there was a lot of lukewarmness, and one of the sponsors that was there, I said to one of the kids on the way out, go grab that certificate thingy and let's fly out of here. And I just remember thinking, even if I try my best with my kids here, we're going to be surrounded by a bunch of people who aren't taking it seriously.
That certificate thingy, just bring the thing. Sure, it's only saying that you received a holy sacrament of the church from the bishop, but
you got sealed with the Holy Spirit.
Just go get that piece of paper.
Yeah, it's so. I just, one thing led to another. Finally, I took it to the Lord. I went to the Adoration Chapel, and I took 2 hours there, and I read through the Latin Mass in its entirety. I'd never really slowly digested it, and I remember when I read it, and I was thinking, this is perfect. This is perfect. There's nothing you want to change about this. I don't know why you would take anything out of this. Perfect. And I just knew. I was like, okay, it has to be this way. And I said to my wife, I'm like, from now on, we're only going to a Latin Mass. And there's been all these changes that have come along the way, but we homeschool our kids now. We go to the Latin Mass. And if you would have asked me, 3 years ago, if this would be the way we were going to be living, there's no way I would have been able to tell you that this is what was going to happen. This is not us. This is the Holy Spirit totally coming through and sweeping up and cleaning up the mess that was ongoing in our house. Our house is happier. I'm not angry anymore. Very rare for me to have these outbursts. And it's funny because when my dad was still out of the church, here he was, he'd given me this advice of get calmer. And where from, Dad? And then I found where from. because that calmness, that peace, it wasn't something I had to work at. I didn't have to fake it. It just was there.
So a question for you, Joel. Do you still go to the Novus Ordo at all?
Not really.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, I go to probably like one a year.
I just recently went to one because my kids, we homeschool, but 2 days a week is at a choir school. And so they celebrate the First Friday Masses. And so they go to a different parish.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I actually went to one, support them and go to that. And it was funny because I hadn't been in like 2.5 months. And even though I had gone every day for like a year and a half, it was now it was the foreign thing. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have the contempt for it that a lot of people do. I mean, I still have this like empathy and compassion for a lot of the people that are there. And I understand it's a big jump. It is. It's a big jump.
Yeah, I've got a different attitude about it myself than when, because I first started going to it back in my hometown in 2012. Then a month later, I moved here, and then I was trying to find a church. And in I think January, February 2013, I found the Latin Mass, and I stayed, and I've stayed ever since. And if I go home, I go to the Ukrainian Byzantine Rite with my mom.
Yeah.
The Greek Catholic Church, but and of course my dad doesn't go to church of any kind. But and of course here I'm exclusively the Latin Mass, and thankfully it's not too far from my place. So.
Well, I was having a debate with somebody about this. A friend of mine on Twitter. And so he only goes to the Latin Mass. And he was asking us, he was kind of polling us, he was kind of like, I missed my opportunity to go to the Latin Mass this week because of circumstances. So the only option I have is to go to the Novus Ordo or stay home. And he was opting to go stay home. And I disagreed with him. I thought, no, your Sunday obligation is your Sunday obligation. And I think that we all have to kind of support each other through these kind of things. I mean, there is a contingent that is so against the Novus Ordo that even me saying this, if you have any of them in your audience, they've just now cut me off and don't like me very much after that. But I think the key thing is that look, man, it's valid. It's valid.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, because if you go to a valid mass and the consecration is valid, but then everything after that is irreverent and liturgical abuse of some sort, it's trouble. And so some people might want to not even support that at all, and I get why, because there's some really bad ones out there.
That's certainly true. My thoughts on it. I would try really hard not to go to a Novus Ordo, but you do have to do a Sunday obligation.
Yes.
So if that's the only thing available, like my number one priority is I find Latin Mass. If not, I'll go the Byzantine Rite. But Latin's pretty good normally because the Mass we go to is at 7 a.m. So that pretty much gets it out of the way. Yeah. By the time you hit 8:30, you're done for the day. We're sitting having coffee at that point, so.
Which is something I really do enjoy about the community. It's really funny. There's a bad rap for the trads out there that they're like cold and unwelcoming. And there couldn't be anything further from the truth.
Well, there are some that are, and it's a shame that the ones who are somewhat loud. And I mean, I don't want to name any names, but
I haven't really seen it yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure I will.
Okay. Yeah. No. it's important in this day and age. Look, there's obviously a modernism crisis in the church, just like you had an Arian crisis, just like you had an iconoclast crisis. The best thing is just be prudent. Don't make enemies where you don't have to, and pick your battles. I got some questions for you about
Sure,
your.
yeah, man. Listen, I actually got my testimony in under an hour this time, so.
By the way, there's a story behind this. This is actually our second time filming. The first time, Joel did his testimony in about an hour and 40 minutes. And then he comes to me at church and he's like, I think we need to refilm it. And I'm very glad he did because I really wanted to refilm it.
I'm a blabber.
Yeah. Don't worry, we all blab.
It was my third. This is my third time telling my testimony in like a week.
Yeah. But I still have his 2-hour testimony, our first 2-hour thing, on my computer, and I may or may not.
If you send it to me, I'll put it up on my thing, and then that points people back to your show, and we can go from there. If because I don't want to ruin your flow, I'm following EMJ for crying out loud.
Yeah, big shoes to fill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd love to meet the man. He's quite an inspiration. I really like him a lot.
Yeah, no, he is truly a blessing.
He's on my list. I'd love to interview him. I have it over here. It's on my. It's right next to Gulag Archipelago, right back there.
Wow, this book, guys. I'm not kidding. If you haven't read this book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, I think this is the most important book written in the last 100 years. I am not kidding.
Yep. Yeah, it's
certainly the last 50 years for sure. Certainly the last 50 years.
Yep.
I just remembered 100 years you got Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc to compete with, but last 50 years, this
C.S. Lewis.
This book right here, yeah. So.
No, he's great. I'd love to interview Dr. Robertson Jenis. That's another one. I think he's written for Culture Wars as well.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. He's good. I don't think he's written a book that's under about 800 pages, similar to Dr. Jones. I've got his trilogy here, Not by Bread Alone.
Wow.
Not by Scripture Alone. Not by Faith Alone. This is 800 pages. And of course I'm an apologist, so I have to have these books, right?
Right.
So, I mean, if you've read this book and you debate a Protestant, the Protestant's in trouble, let me tell you.
I've heard him with James White a few times.
He has had some good debates with
Mark Slick. Is it Matt Slick or Mark
Slick? Oh, yeah. Matt Slick, he probably thinks he knows more than he actually does, so he picks fights with people that he shouldn't pick fights with. I'm not saying he's a dumb guy, but he thinks he's smarter than he is. He bites off more than he could chew, and his Son Genis debate was a great example of that. So Joel,
twice too. It was crazy.
Yeah,
but, it's one of those things where it's just like, pray for that guy. I pray for every one of those guys to convert. It would be good for them to convert.
It'd be good for them, and it'd be good for the church. Imagine having James White and Matt Slick in the church.
Well, we're seeing some pretty heavy-duty conversions already underway. There's some pretty big ones that are coming about.
Well, Sorry?
Especially in the community,
Yeah.
I've seen a few of them for sure.
Yeah, like my friend Stephanie Nicholas,
Blonde from Blonde in the Belly of the Beast, who I interviewed a couple of times before. Rush V is not quite Catholic, but he's close. I don't think he'll stop in the Orthodox Church. I think, honestly, for everybody who has a problem with like the modernism in the Catholic Church, or doesn't like the homilies about immigration and all this kind of stuff, like I think just if you could find a Latin mass to go to, in my preference, I like the FSSP. If you can find one of those, you will be so pleased that you chose to go to it, because it's just exactly what we all need right now.
Are you talking about the people that are deciding between Catholic and Orthodoxy, or?
Well, I'll give you an example. So the comedian Owen Benjamin, he grew up Catholic, and he's got a lot of complaints about the Catholic Church because of stuff that he grew up in. I mean, he's pretty much like a few months younger than me, and so there's a lot of similarities in our stories of why we fell away and why we didn't want to go back. And there's a lot of stuff that, like, when you look at it on the grand scheme of things, it's like, well, like, look what the Pope said on the back of this plane, and you're like, how do you defend it? Like, we need apologetics for that. It's a lot of gymnastics to try to, like, go, well, yes and no. And you get to the point where you're like, okay, that's not part of the magisterium, it's not infallible, and that's what we have. But a lot of people who are fallen away Catholics, they don't know that. They don't know
it's like
bad idea of what Catholicism actually
they don't
is.
know the difference between an airplane interview in terms of authority and an apostolic constitution. It's like they're
an encyclical is not infallible.
No.
An encyclical is not infallible.
It could be, depending on how it's worded. There's some stuff in encyclicals that is infallible.
Correct.
Yeah, but like for example, like Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, I don't think there's anything infallible in their encyclicals. I've read them.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll take some more pontificum, any day of the week. It helps the cause.
Well, that's not an encyclical though. That's a motu proprio.
Okay.
But, I'm being all technical here. Okay.
Questions, though.
I got some questions. Now, there's a lot of Catholics who fall away and they come back and become a Baptist. Why didn't you become a Baptist? Or a Pentecostal or some kind of evangelical or something like that?
There's a few reasons. I mean, I felt like because I was so distorted and lost feeling, everything was kind of circling back to coming home.
Mm.
And so, it's kind of that go with what you know. And so when I was having that epiphany of teaching my kid right from wrong, I thought, well, where did I get my teachings from that? What are the things that I do like about myself? I lived in Paraguay for 3 years, and I used to get chastised by my colleagues down there because I was too honest with my dealings. I paid my bills on time. They were like, why would you pay your bills on time? Nobody pays their bills on time here. You got to not pay a bill or two. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. It's not something I can do. And so it was part familiarity, but then also I think deep down you just kind of know that's where the truth lies. And, it's funny because I'm not an apologist. I had my moments of being able to explain myself. But like I had a friend of mine who was in Paraguay, and he was a hardcore radical Calvinist. And we got into these conversations on Skype, and rarely did we actually do a video or even an audio one, but we just go back and forth with texting. And so he would hit me with some sort of thing about why the Catholic Church is, the whore of Babylon or all this kind of stuff. And I remember, almost at the beginning, I was kind of having fun with it. And I was just kind of like, rope-a-doping with him, and
Were you going to church at this point?
Yeah, I just started going back. I literally just started going back. And the only thing that I could do was, I'm going to go into this full-heartedly. I'm not going to doubt anything. And the second I doubt something is the second I'm going to fall away again.
Sure.
I clung really hard.
And the Calvinist, just for clarification, was not a native Paraguayan. It's an American expat.
Well, he was an American. Yeah, he was an American. Yeah. And so this guy and I remember I learned more about my faith and then more about how crazy Calvinism seems to me. It's just such a dark, terrible, awful interpretation. It just, and there would be so many times where it would just blow my mind. But at the same time, anytime he'd hit me with something, I knew I could look up anywhere. I could find the right answer in Catholicism. Catholicism is so deep. It's the way, and so I could always find the answer. It was like the law, It was like you could find a precedent. You could find it exactly, and it's like that. It was really easy for me to always refute him, always, just in seconds. Yeah.
A lot of reading, guys. A lot of reading. Those take... And I've got other Syngenis books, too, that are just as long. The guy doesn't write short books.
I grew up with... there weren't... I say I fell away, but it's not like my entire time as a kid growing up that I felt nothing. It wasn't that I was a non-believer. I think things that made me fall away were things like, like in Canada, we have the Winnipeg Statement. So it's like, well, they changed their mind on birth control, so that means they changed their mind. Like, I was in the mindset of that priest who's like, oh, the church doesn't care about this. Because that's what I was being taught. And so the thing is that it's like, well, if you change your mind about this and that and this and that and this and that, then why have any of this? But the one thing that I did notice was that my grandfather actually converted away from Catholicism, and he went to non-denominational full gospel Pentecostal. And it creeped me out when I was a kid because he told me all the stuff that we were doing, we were going to go to hell. And so, like being Catholic, go to hell. It's like, Grandpa, you're telling your grandchild this. Like, it really sucked. And I didn't like it at all. It was wow. Really troubling. And
my grandparents never told me that, and they died practicing Lutherans, both of them.
Yeah, no, he was really anti-Catholic for a while, and then they also took a lot of money from him, and so
is he back in the church now?
He's passed on.
Oh, he's passed on. Okay,
he's passed on. But when he got better before the end, So, but okay. It was one of those things too. I think the key thing is like, I knew these people. I knew this language. You know what I mean? I knew what to expect. And so to go into another denomination would have required a lot from me to just, I don't know, Catholicism was in my bones. I just didn't even know it.
Yeah, no, And then you told me as soon as you got the confession, you got to receive our Lord Jesus Christ in the Eucharist.
Huge. That's it.
Right there within an hour almost, right? And a few more questions.
Sure.
Were there any parts of the Bible, any specific verses that played a role and that have helped you out?
Yeah, I mean, when you brought up the Eucharist, taking the Eucharist, like when I was first coming back to the church, I'd never really read the Bible before. So the very first, I was actually told by my spiritual director at the time, I'd only really read Genesis and then maybe some of the Psalms. But he said, if you read Genesis, you probably, you're wanting to get back into this, you want to read the New Testament. And he actually recommended me to read John first. So John chapter 1, the very opening of it blew my mind. It was just, it was everything I needed to hear. I still love it. I still love it.
That's a masterpiece. Those first 18 verses are an absolute masterpiece. If you read what St. Augustine wrote about that, like those verses just blew his mind too.
Totally.
Like it's hard not to read that, and it just perfect.
I'm also I am a big Mary. I love Mary a lot.
Oh, you're Catholic.
I know, but I never knew I would. I never knew it. So I think it's John 2, where she tells the servants, do whatever he tells you. And I think that's a really good motto for life. Just do whatever he tells you. And it puts you in a really good space of obedience. You're being told by the Blessed Mother to do this. So it kind of really encapsulates a lot of my faith just in this one line. Do whatever he tells you. John chapter 6, with the explanation of the Eucharist. That was big. John chapter 17, where he is
the high priestly prayer, right?
Yeah. Revelation at the end where uh, there shall be no more tears. The new Israel, and then I really like the Book of Sirach.
You're missing out, Protestants. You are missing
Yes.
out that you don't have Sirach.
No, Sirach, you're missing out on wisdom. You're really missing out on a lot of them. But like Judith, is probably like my favorite like epic in the Bible. And and if I have another kid and I have a daughter, her middle name will be Judith,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
My mom had a sister named Judith.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so we talked about. I like the parable of the prodigal son, which I believe appears in Luke and Matthew.
No, I think it's only Luke. Luke
Oh,
15 verses 11 through 32.
the parable of the sower
Yeah.
was another one.
There's something I thought of. Protestants out there, I know Protestants, you love reading your Bible, and good on you, keep doing that. But think, if you become Catholic, you get more Bible to read. That's a great advertisement, right?
So I used to do this podcast with my friend Uncle Buck, and we used to find like all these times where our translations were different, and it was significant. So, like for instance, in Luke, when the angels are coming to the shepherds, and they say, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, peace to men of goodwill." Right? Well, his had, "and on earth goodwill towards men." That's a very different one.
Yeah, no, it's tough because there are so many. There's a handful of Catholic translations, but there are so many Protestant translations. And the thing is, a lot of people don't know this. The further you get away from the first Protestants, the more Protestant the Bible becomes. For example, a lot of people don't know this, but William Tyndale, who thought the Pope was the Antichrist and all this stuff, didn't believe in free will and believe in all the doctrines that the Protestants believe. He translates Luke 1:28 as "Hail, full of grace." If you go to a Protestant Bible now, like the King James, it says it says "favored one." Favored one versus "full of grace." And you get Tyndale. You can't say he's biased in favor of Catholicism. He translated from the Greek, because I know there were some English translations prior to that, but they were mostly done from Latin, whereas he did his from Greek, and it was a Protestant translation. By the way, I'm not endorsing Tyndale's translation, but I could go into that. But couple more questions. Are there any saints that played a role?
Yeah. So my patron saint is Saint Gregory the Great, and I've done a lot of reading of his letters, and his on pastoral care actually is very good for us. just in general, you don't have to be a good priest to benefit from it.
Yeah, but boy, that's a book you need. In fact, I was talking to someone on Twitter today. I mean, if you're going to be a priest,
yeah,
read that book.
Absolutely.
It's like, this is not a joke,
Or a bishop. I really hope all the bishops read that book.
Yeah.
I really like. I'm a writer, so I remember looking up who the patron saint of writers was, and I really got to know Saint Francis de Sales.
Yes.
And so, Introduction to the Devout Life.
Yeah, I've got like 12 of his books.
Oh,
they're so good.
Yeah. But the Introduction to the Devout Life, I really love that one a lot. I read that he had an affinity for, I think it was the spiritual combat, and so I remember reading that. I found that I really get a lot from Saint Alphonsus Liguori. His stuff really speaks. It's like it's perfectly written in this way that I can completely understand everything that he's saying, and he's quite gentle in a lot of ways.
He's gentle, but a straight shooter at the same time. It's
totally.
Absolutely brilliant. Question for you: Have you ever read Saint Robert Bellarmine?
I had a copy. I had to buy. So somebody had told me to read On the Papacy, and by St. Robert Bellarmine, and I got a copy of it because it's hard to get. You can't get it on like Kindle or Amazon or anything.
Yeah, you have to order it from Mediatrix Press. It's Ryan Grant down, I think, in Idaho, who does those translations.
Okay, yeah, I got it, and then I got it as a PDF, and I was able to read it on my tablet. My tablet stopped working, and so, it was the thing that it was quite influential for a very short period of time that I actually had a chance to read it. In terms of, it got me to let go of the sacred cow of democracy. It turned me into a monarchist, which I never thought I'd ever be.
I never thought I would either. I mean,
but he made a.
When you learn that democracy, especially representative democracy, is a monumental fraud, you know,
yeah.
It's so.
I hate elections. You know me. I mean, I hate elections. I have a really tough time voting for ponies, and that's all we get.
Yeah, that's literally all we get. All right, now.
But I was going to say one more saint.
Sure.
Saint in particular is for me is Saint Philomena.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had actually heard her story from Father Jerome, and I had never heard of it before. It blew my mind, and I started reading more about her, and I did a litany to her, and I actually made a request for my father, and it was crazy because the next morning I didn't talk to my father about this, but all my prayer and my intention, and I asked for your intercession, was for my father. And so my dad was diagnosed 10 years ago with multiple sclerosis. Yeah. So he, like night times can be brutal. But what ended up happening was I prayed for my father, and then the next morning after I went to Mass, I talked to my parents, and my dad was in a great mood. He said he had a really great night the night before. He said, because normally in the middle of the night, if he wakes up and he has to go to the bathroom or something, he has to wake up my mom. But for whatever reason, that night, he was able to make it all the way to out and back again without any help. And just that one glimpse of hope made such a big difference for him. And he said, I felt lighter, and I felt like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel for this. That this is going to end. And so he was able to make that walk, and I was like, Dad, like I did a prayer for you like last night. Like, you mean to tell me that like last night you had this like help, this feeling of like support? And he was like, yeah, it was completely remarkable. And so I have a major devotion to Saint Philomena, and I actually have I wear a third-class relic of hers on as a medal, and I just love that little gal. She's just so great, and so yeah, Saint Philomena, and then the one last one would probably be Saint Teresa of Avila, and the interior castles. Yeah, great. I didn't mean to bounce away from that other question here. Yeah.
I've got the collected works of St. Teresa of Avila. They're right by Robert St. Genis, so thanks for bringing up everyone I got in my bookshelf back here.
I got to send him this clip, and so like I can try to get an interview with him later.
Okay. Now, tell us about the podcast you have coming out.
Yeah, it's called As We Ought, and I am no apologist. Okay, there are way better apologists out there, yourself included. That it's not a league I can keep up with. I'm not going to have any kind of imprimatur, any kind of thing like that. Like I write with mistakes. Nobody wants to hear that going into it right away, but it's based off of a line from Fulton Sheen when he was talking about. He's actually talking about capitalism and communism, but he said, in capitalism, it's full freedom, and it's to do what you want, which is also sort of the do as thou willst is the Crowleyan motto as well. But then under totalitarian or communism, it was do as you must. But we as Catholics, we should do as we ought. And so I really want to keep things positive. I don't want to go into the political side of things with the scandals in the church or this versus that. I think a lot of times when you get into those ruts, you lose sight of the cross. You lose sight of what truly matters.
Yeah.
And so we're focused on what everybody else is doing all the time, and we're not focused on Christ, and we're not focused on our job as in our family or our role in the community or all that kind of stuff. Then really we're just barking at we're just making noises, and we're not really doing what we need to do. Like the number one thing that converted my wife and my family was just seeing how differently I was living. I didn't have to say much about it. I didn't have to talk people into it. It was just, wow, look at Joel. He's not blowing up all the time, and he's not angry all the time. He's got a calmness when he needs a calmness. And I think if we can try to put our focus a little bit more on that and just remember to do as we ought, I think that's going to be my goal for it, at least. I have a few ideas on how I'm going to tackle it.
I'm excited for this podcast, Joel. I'm excited. So as soon as it comes out, I'll put it on my Twitter and my website.
Sure.
And so just so all my viewers can see it, and I will be listening to it. Joel, one last question, just a quick answer. What do you say to all the Catholics out there who are wandering about? They may be lapsed, they may be in some other church, they may be here, they may be there. What do you say to them?
Learn some humility. Learn some humility. I know that's I just took a left jab right at your face, but learn a little bit of humility. Part of the reasons why we fall away is we think we know better than the church. Part of the reasons that we think that we fall away is that we think we have all the answers, or that we are to come up with all the answers for all the solutions. We're not. We can't. We won't. It's not going to happen. Put your faith in Him. Put your faith in Christ, and then the gates of hell will not prevail against His church. Mm-hmm. And so you always have to remember that. As dark as it ever seems, this is the church He created. This is the church He founded.
I kind of always joke about that verse. It's like it says the gates of hell won't prevail. It doesn't say it won't come close.
The smoke won't enter the sanctuary. It's the thing is that my dad, when he would say, when I would get angry and he'd say get calmer, it was funny because he was out of the church and he would get angry, and I would remind him, like, you don't need to have that anger anymore. You go, where am I supposed to put it? And I'm like, ask him. He'll help
the Lord. Amen.
He'll help you. And my dad came back, and now he leads my mom in the rosary every night.
Wow.
And he goes to church he goes to mass every Sunday. And he goes to the 12:30 at our church. And his words when he came in.
That's high mass, by the way. Just so.
What's that?
Well, I'm just saying that's high mass.
Yeah, Sun Mass. He's like, I've come home. This is exactly what I've been needing my whole life.
Wow.
He felt cheated too. And so if you have a doubt, I actually do believe that every Catholic should check out the Latin Mass. If you have had any kind of doubts, you'll have them extinguished by going there.
It's
Christ is there. He resides there. Peace resides there. Everything you need is there.
Amen. Thank you so much, Joel, for joining me on this show. And make sure to go to follow Joel on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
It's at as we ought. At as we ought.
Okay.
At
as we ought. And if you follow him, I'm sure he'll notify when his podcast comes out. It's coming out soon.
Absolutely.
Make sure to go to allanruhl.com. Follow me at Allan Ruhl on Twitter. And thank you so much. And God bless.
God bless. Take care, man. Thanks so much.
All right, bye.